Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. Thanks for joining us. This is our digital desk here at Fox 12 Oregon. And one of the things we get to do at this desk is dig into data and opinions and find out what it is that Oregonians are thinking about. We find that out through extensive polls. And of course, DHM Research is one of the best places to go to for that. I'm joined now by John Horvick from DHM to talk about, well, a pretty major issue that I think a lot of people have diverse opinions on, and that is the issue of transgender issues and policies. John, thanks so much for being here with us.
Hey, glad to be here. Glad to be able to talk about this.
So let's kind of dig in, I guess, give us a base level of what this poll is and how you kind of went about it, and to give us our base level of where we're starting.
Sure. So at DHM Research, we frequently commission our own work to talk to Oregonians about all sorts of different issues, things that are emerging, things that Oregonians are talking about, and we do this work so we can stay on top of things, but also so that we can share back to the community what we're hearing. And so we do it several times a year. And in this survey, we asked about different issues, but including around transgender policies. Part of the reason we did that is because it's being talked a lot about in the news. It affects a lot of Oregonians. And then at this moment, as we sit here today, it's a big issue in Salem. In fact, it's part of why the Republicans have walked out of the legislature to try to stop some legislation that's happening in the Capitol. So it's timely. We're glad to be able to share this with the community.
It is very, very timely. Yeah, just as you mentioned, with everything that's going on. That was, I don't know when you're watching this, that was yesterday. Who knows? It's changing constantly. So going to this poll itself. So there's a lot of different things that I see that you've asked them. I'll let you kind of lead, where you want to start with this.
Sure.
As far as, what some of the first things were that you asked.
Sure. So first, it's just good for people to know. This is a survey of Oregonians. So we talked to registered voters in Oregon. Now, in Oregon, about 94% in the last election, 94% of Oregonians who were eligible to vote were registered. So that's our population of people we're talking to. That means we're talking to people in the metro area. We're talking to people in the Willamette Valley. We're talking to people on the coast and in eastern Oregon. We're talking to people of all different age groups, political persuasions. And so it's a snapshot of where Oregonians as a whole are at. The other thing to know about this is that we leaned into some other national research that's been done on these issues, including work that Pew Research has done, because we wanted to see how Oregonians compared to Americans and give some context to the results that we have here in Oregon now. We asked some key questions. One is kind of just a fundamental question. Do you believe whether someone is a man or woman is determined by their sex that they were assigned at birth, or that someone can be a man or woman even if it's different from their sex assigned at birth? So we kind of started with that fundamental question, and then asked some questions about policy. So on this big question, whether someone is a man or woman can be determined by what they were assigned at birth or not. Some key things that stand out. We'll get to party, I'm sure, a lot, partisan differences. But the thing that really I noticed in the results is differences by generation. So overall, 45% said, hey, it's assigned at birth, and 46% say it could be different than what's assigned at birth. So basically, split.
Right down the middle.
Right down the middle. Now, if we look at the it's assigned at birth category, just 28% of 18 to 29-year-olds put themselves into that camp. 57% of those who are 65 and older put them into the it's assigned at birth camp. And you sort of see it just march from lower to higher percentages as we go from younger to older. And so there's definitely something that is occurring with this really large group of millennials and Gen Z who are large in population, have big influence on culture, are really good about getting their personal stories told to the world, how they feel, versus our older generation. And our older generation, frankly, is just much more likely to show up and vote and have influence in places like the Capitol because they have more influence in who's elected, but also older people tend to be those who are making our laws. And so that's one of the big things that stand out to me is that younger people and older people feel very different on that sort of foundational question about what is gender.
Yeah, so it's really following along that generational line,
Yeah,
or I
yeah,
guess that spectrum. As you mentioned, just I think this is why I always think it's interesting looking at data, like actual opinions from people, where it's at, and seeing it line up like that. I suppose for some people that might be kind of expected that would be how that would line up, but seeing data that also shows that, I think is pretty interesting.
yeah.
So,
It's one thing to know or to anticipate that would be the
right,
trend. It's another thing to say it's twice as much. People who are
yeah,
65 and older are twice as likely as those who are 18 to 29 to think that gender is assigned at birth. Now, when we get to partisanship, sort of ideology, 83% of Republicans say that gender is assigned at birth. Just 26% of Democrats agree to that. And so that's going to then
almost the
drive
same.
a lot of what's happening in the Capitol this week right now, because our legislators, we have large majorities of Democrats in the House and a significant majority in the Senate as well. And there's just big differences among Democratic and Republican voters on this question, and that's going to influence a lot, both the individuals who are making our laws, but who they're influenced by, who they think that their constituents are too. So those are some of the two big things that stand out to me, really, these generational differences, and of course these big partisan differences. And something is fundamental to us is how we think about gender.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I guess I suppose maybe expect it or anticipate it, but like you said, seeing the data and actually have that back up, I mean, it seems like it's almost exactly the same on each side. You mentioned it was
Yeah.
83% versus 26%, so yeah, it all lines up there completely. Looking at the two different ideologies and political parties. So going from the generational differences, the ideological differences, what else did you find out from this?
Well, some of the really hotly contested policies that are happening now in Oregon, but have really sort of driven a lot of politics and conversation nationally. We asked about those too, including about sports, including about medical care provided to minors, about insurance. And so let's just walk through some of these. One of
Yeah.
the big conversations that has occurred over the last well, really, I'd say the last year or two is whether or not children. I think primarily is what we're thinking about, but not exclusively children. I suppose could be adults as well. But I think a lot of what we're thinking about is high school sports, children's sports. Should we require that transgender athletes compete on teams that match their assigned sex at birth? And 61% of Oregonians support that. Just 27% oppose that. That's gotten a lot of, there's been policies passed in legislatures across the United States over the course of the last year that require this. There's been, conversation all the way up to Olympic sports about this. And it's pretty clear from these data where the balance of support is. Again, 61% support requiring that transgender athletes compete on teams that match their assigned sex at birth. Now, that actually is different than what Pew found with the same question of Americans. It was in their research, excuse me, I'm going to misspeak here. On this particular question, we'll get to some of the other questions. Oregonians basically align with where Americans are at. So nationally, about 58% said that they should be required to compete in teams that they're assigned sex at birth, and here in Oregon, 61. There are some differences from Oregonians and Americans as well, but that's one of the big ones. That's certainly an important issue. Affects families and kids and athletes, and policy's been debated about it. Another one, and I think this really gets to a lot of what the conversation is in Salem this week, has to do with minors. And so we asked whether or not Oregonians would support or oppose in excuse me, I'm gonna get my
That's okay. It's a lot of data that you're going through, and again, for anybody
that's a lot of data. So support or oppose making it illegal for healthcare professionals to provide someone younger than 18 medical care for a transition. okay, do you support or oppose making it illegal for a healthcare professional to provide someone younger than 18 medical care for a transition? 60% of Oregonians support that.
Wow.
35% oppose that. And that is one of the, I think, the most sensitive and contested things that is happening around a lot of these discussions, and a big part of what's driving the consternation in Salem. So that's a big one. And if we look at the partisan differences for those two questions, it really sort of speaks to sort of the politics of it. So on the sports, the athletes, 85% of Republicans support requiring transgender athletes to compete on teams that match their science sex at birth. It's 41% of Democrats. Now, this is challenging, I will admit, to talk about because these are sensitive issues, these are personal issues, these are important issues. So to talk about them in crass political terms feels a little discomforting to me. But that said, from a purely political perspective, this is a policy that unites Republicans and divides Democrats. And issues that unite one party and divide another party are frequently issues that we see political parties try to exploit to gain advantage. And it's not to say that that's the only thing that this is about. I don't want to suggest that, but it makes it something that's tempting for politicians to try to take advantage of. Similarly, on the question of making it illegal for healthcare professionals to provide someone younger than 18 medical care for a transition, 80% of Republicans support that, 44% of Democrats to support that. So it's another issue that unites Republicans and divides Democrats. And again, that's a type of dynamic that we see politicians try to exploit, where you're united and the other side's divided. And that feeds into the whole political disputes, builds into media narratives, how campaigns sort of try to activate their base, and these are really issues that fall into that.
And that's a historically, common political move is to do something like that. You
Yes.
see something divided, split it up. And again, just for anybody to get, we're talking about the data here. These are from polling results of Oregonians' opinions on transgender issues and policies. So that's what we're analyzing. We're just taking a look at what it is that people are thinking, whether it's along political lines, generational gaps, age differences, everything in between. So that's why, John, I really appreciate you sharing this data to kind of see where we're standing on it, because it is such a huge issue right now. Just to reiterate it again, the Republicans in Oregon, walking out in the House there based on some issues, related to this. So finding out where people stand is important. So we've got a lot of data here that you just kind of went over already, but I'm really interested in as well, you mentioned a couple of times, like the comparisons to Oregonians compared nationally. And where were some of the stark differences there? Or were
right. So the biggest stark differences, or one of the biggest stark differences, is on healthcare professionals providing someone younger than 18 with medical care for a transition. There's 60% support for that here in Oregon. Nationally, it was actually less, it was 46%. Now, a big caveat to that, the Pew research that was done that used the same question wording was in 2022. It was a year ago. And I think what we've seen is where a year ago this was less salient of a political topic, it wasn't quite discussed so much. Legislators weren't yet making policy around it, and voters weren't paying as much attention to it. Now that they are, the issues become more polarized, and Democrats have moved in one direction, Republicans have moved in another direction. And also, people have had another year to think about it. They've heard stories, they've had conversations with their neighbors and in their churches and with their kids, and attitudes could shift as well. But on that question of care for minors, that's really one where we're seeing a difference now in Oregon than Americans responded to a similar question a year ago, and there's more support for limiting that care to minors now than in the past here in Oregon.
So those are one of the differences, and you said there was a lot that did kind of line up. I know you have a lot more research, so please, by all means, let me know if there's some other questions and other things that you found that you think are interesting that you want to share with this.
Which, sure. The other thing, just sort of think of it,
Yeah.
perhaps from a different side. We see strong support. 78% of Oregonians said that they support protecting transgender people from job discrimination. And that's 91% of Republicans, 91% of Democrats, but also 57% of Republicans. And so, how people feel about these issues is complicated, and they approach it from different perspectives. They're going to be selective on the issues, whether it's kids, whether it's sports, whether it's the workplace, whether it's bathrooms. And also that these issues are dynamic. We should assume that opinions are going to shift as people think about it more, have more conversations, experience more people in their lives who are transgendered, that these aren't fixed.
Yeah, these are things that, like you mentioned, dynamic and changing. I mean, you mentioned 2022, a year ago with that data. It feels like 10 years ago for a lot of reasons, but specifically with this issue, as far as how much people have been discussing it, and how prevalent it is now in discussions for everything. And again, for those tuning in, this is all from the research that you have, comparing that with the Pew polls. Anything else that you think you found fascinating, or you found interesting, or something else that you think people should notice from all this data?
Well, we don't know how things are going to play out in the days, weeks, and years to come. But if we just project out what we see today with these generational differences, young people are going to reshape how we think about these questions. And anybody who is not young should be prepared to be in conversation, to hear their concerns. And for those people who are young and trying to push the conversation, I think this is a check to say, hey, people of different generations are starting from a different place.
Yeah.
It's not to say to be patient or to slow down, but it is to say they also have concerns and histories that they want to have be respected as well. But that's probably the thing that I'd say is that we should continue. I think if we look at these data and take these generational differences seriously, to assume that this conversation is going to be ongoing, it's going to be dynamic, and younger generations probably are going to feel different. And they're going to become, more powerful as
Right.
become voters and get elected to office and become, leaders in organizations. And so, continue to expect to have these conversations.
Yeah. Well, John, appreciate you as always, joining us here to talk about this stuff and all of this very important information. It's important to know where people stand, and I find it fascinating analyzing the data to see those different changes. The generational gap, like we mentioned, or how it changes depending on that. So so much to find out from that. I want to let everybody know too. Can you tell everyone where they can go and read this data for themselves?
Sure. If you go to dhmresearch.com and go to our blog, you will find the results to this survey and lots of other surveys. We do these as a public service, and we hope that you check it out.
And we get John to join us here as well on Fox 12 Now to talk about all this data. So I'm sure you'll have more coming up soon that we can discuss and go over.
Absolutely.
All right, John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, and again, thank you to everybody for tuning in to Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is, again, our digital desk here at Fox 12 Oregon. We've got lots of content up, lots of things for you to watch, to listen to, interviews, deep discussions like this. Each one is a little bit different, so we discuss a lot of different things here. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me. Wherever you are, just remember that we're going to be here, and we'll have more and more stuff coming up for you. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.